You didn't fall for her. You fell into yourself, the part that was still unclaimed, still wounded, still waiting. She didn't seduce you. She activated the fracture, the echo of absence, the addiction to being needed, the illusion that love would repair what silence once broke. Most men are told to move on, to let go, but Carl Jung never warned against the woman. He warned against your projection, because what destroys a man isn't her presence. It's what he never dared to face in himself. And when she touched that raw spot, you called it fate. This isn't about her, it never was. It's about the part of you that handed her the crown of your identity, and now calls it heartbreak when she walks away. Let's go deeper, not into her, into the labyrinth she exposed in you. He thought she ruined him, but she just found the version of him he never buried. Not the man, the boy, the one who still needed a mother, not a mirror, the one who confused being seen with being saved. And the moment she withdrew, he collapsed into the arms of his oldest wound. He never chose manhood. He inherited performance, stoicism without depth, responsibility without roots. She didn't dominate him. He submitted before the first argument, not because she was stronger, but because she reminded him of something older, something buried in silence, coated in charm, and starving for power. He walked in thinking he needed love, but what he really needed was a fire. Not warmth, purification, an initiation that burns off the illusion that manhood is just a posture, because posture without spine is just performance in costume. She didn't become his mother because she wanted to. She became it because he never learned to father himself. Every request she made was a test, not of her control but of his depth. He called her too much, but maybe she was just the first one to reflect his lack, the void, the weight, the mask, all his, long before she walked in. Jung said the undeveloped masculine projects power onto the feminine, and so he did, until her nagging became unbearable, because it touched the part of him that still craved permission, not freedom, permission. Like a boy asking the world, "Am I enough yet?" He tried to silence her chaos, but only because it echoed his own. He wasn't fighting her. He was fighting the discomfort of being emotionally unprepared, uninitiated, emotionally outsourced. A boy in a man's body, negotiating identity with a woman who smelled the truth. He thought she overpowered him, but the truth, she was just more familiar with her own darkness than he was with his. She didn't manipulate him. He submitted to the parts of himself he never claimed, because no man bows to a woman until he first bows to the fear of his own weight. She was not his destroyer. She was the flame at the altar of his forgotten passage. He didn't need her affection. He needed a ritual. He needed to walk into the fire and die as a boy, so the man could emerge, but instead, he begged her to carry what only he could resurrect, and when she dropped it, he called it betrayal. He didn't chase her body. He chased the version of himself that only existed in her eyes. When she smiled, he felt seen. When she pulled away, he unraveled. Not because he loved her, but because he hated himself without her. And he mistook that dependency for passion. He called it romance, but it was a contract. She'd validate his worth, and in return he'd sacrifice his truth. It was subtle at first, adapting, pleasing, shape-shifting. Not because she demanded it, but because his selfhood was borrowed. A man with no center will orbit anything that offers identity. Jung wrote, "What we fail to integrate, we seek to be validated from." So he gave her everything, hoping she'd give him back to himself. But she couldn't, because he never gave her a man, only a mirror, one cracked by childhood shame, polished by external approval. It wasn't love, it was atonement. He needed her admiration like oxygen, because inside he was choking on silence, the kind inherited from a father who never praised. She became his emotional ventilator, and when she withdrew, he suffocated. Not because she abandoned him, but because he abandoned himself years ago. She didn't reject his masculinity. She exposed how fragile it really was, how quickly it shattered under pressure, because if your confidence depends on someone else's gaze, it's not strength. It's a costume stitched from insecurity. He wanted her to see him as powerful, but he couldn't even sit in silence without unraveling. He flexed confidence but flinched at confrontation. He craved control but collapsed under rejection. And deep down, he knew she was never his enemy. His own void was. He tried harder, loved harder, performed harder, and every time she turned away, he worked harder to be worthy. But this wasn't love, it was self-escape. She wasn't his woman, she was his reflection, one he hoped would rescue him from emotional extinction. Masculinity that needs to be praised is still in chains. It looks like muscle, but it bleeds at the first cut. You don't build strength by being needed. You build it by facing the part of you that no longer needs to be chosen. And that part, it's been waiting in the silence you keep avoiding. He became fluent in her moods, read her silences like scripture, tiptoed through her storms as if love meant being quiet while drowning. But he wasn't being kind, he was being avoidant. He didn't fear her. He feared what might erupt if he stopped pleasing. Anger, that was the forbidden word. He buried it early. Maybe it scared his mother, maybe it got him punished, so he grew up polite, careful, accommodating. And every time she exploded, he called it passion. Not because it was, but because it gave him permission to keep hiding. She cried, he apologized, she withdrew, he chased. Not because she was manipulative, but because his boundaries were imaginary. He confused emotional volatility with depth, because stillness to him felt like absence. Jung warned, what you repress returns disguised, often as destruction. So while he kept smiling, his resentment fermented. He swallowed war just to keep peace. And when he finally snapped, he didn't understand why. But she did. She always knew. She didn't gaslight him. He gaslit himself by calling submission empathy and self-erasure love. She didn't demand control. He offered it every time he silenced his truth to avoid a scene. And slowly, she stopped respecting him. Not out of cruelty, out of instinct. Real strength isn't quiet compliance. It's the ability to sit with discomfort without outsourcing your spine. He didn't need to explode. He needed to confront, to feel the heat without burning down the room. He feared his rage, so he let hers dominate the space. He feared grief, so he joked his way through loss. He feared loneliness, so he stayed in dynamics that killed his dignity. But here's the thing, unexpressed truth doesn't vanish, it rots, and love cannot grow in that soil. A man who cannot confront his own emotional fire will always serve someone else's, not because he's weak, but because no one ever showed him how to hold it. So he calls himself a peacemaker. But deep down, he knows he's just exhausted. He memorized her patterns like scripture, analyzed every word, every shift in tone, every pause between messages, not because she was a mystery, but because she became his mirror. He wasn't studying her, he was avoiding himself, because looking at her was easier than sitting with the parts of him that felt hollow. He said, I don't understand her. But the real question was, why did he need to? Why did her silence feel like starvation? Why did her distance feel like death? It wasn't about her. It was about what he thought he lost when she pulled away. Jung said the anima, when projected, becomes a seductive trap. She wasn't a woman. She was his fantasy dressed in flesh, the symbol of healing, redemption, worth. But she didn't ask for that. He handed her the role because he didn't know who he was without her gaze. He wasn't addicted to her. He was addicted to the illusion, the version of himself he only saw through her validation. And when she stopped playing along, he felt discarded. But the truth? He was never in love. He was in pursuit of emotional anesthesia. She didn't owe him answers. He owed himself honesty. Why was her chaos familiar? Why did pain feel like home? Why did he crave her even after she wounded him? Because obsession isn't passion, it's unhealed need. It's a child looking for his mother in the body of every lover. It's the unconscious screaming, if I fix her, maybe I fix me. But that's not healing. That's codependence dressed as devotion. He kept decoding her because he didn't want to decode the truth, that without her, he felt empty. That his identity wasn't anchored, it was borrowed. And losing her wasn't the tragedy. It was losing access to the person he thought he was when she looked at him like he mattered. She wasn't the puzzle, he was. And every time he tried to solve her, he avoided the real work, which wasn't understanding her, but finally facing the obsession that disguised his fear of self. He called her unpredictable, but he was the one without a compass. He blamed her instability, without admitting that stability felt foreign. She didn't confuse him. She just reflected a man who had no internal direction. She walked in with storms, but he met her without shelter. No boundaries, no emotional roots, no architecture to hold himself. He craved her intensity because stillness reminded him of how vacant he felt. He said he loved her, but really, he was addicted to the drama. Jung wrote, "We attract what reflects our unconscious patterns." So if your soul is fragmented, don't be surprised when she shows up in pieces. He thought she was the problem, but she was just a spotlight, pointing at everything he hadn't built inside. He said she made him feel alive, but what he meant was she disrupted the numbness. And that chaos, it wasn't hers alone. It was his emotional hangover, projected onto a woman who refused to play stable for him. The burden wasn't hers. It was his absence, echoed back. She didn't lie. She mirrored, and he didn't see it, because that would mean taking ownership of the quicksand within. He wanted clarity from her, while staying hidden from himself. He wanted her to be solid, while he remained liquid. Every fight wasn't just about her words. It was a test of his own emotional foundation, and most of the time he failed. Not by being wrong, but by being unrooted. You can't lead what you can't even hold. And he couldn't hold her because he'd never held himself. She was chaos, yes, but so was he, and the difference? She owned it, he denied it, and denial always multiplies in the mirror of love. He thought he was betrayed, but all she ever did was reflect him, with terrifying precision, no filter, no mask, just the raw truth. He didn't need loyalty from her. He needed emotional architecture, the kind no one else can build for you. He made her gaze sacred, every compliment, a resurrection, every silence, a funeral. Not because she was divine, but because he abandoned his own voice long ago. She became his proof of worth, and the moment she looked away, he unraveled like a man who never learned to stand alone. Her love became his oxygen, but she wasn't a lifeline. She was just present. It was his soul that had been exiled for so long. He mistook any warmth for salvation. So he clung, adapted, diminished, not for her, but for the illusion that he mattered, finally. Jung warned, without individuation, we outsource our identity. He didn't know what he believed until she believed in it first. He didn't know who he was until she mirrored something lovable. That's not intimacy. That's identity theft with permission. And it always ends the same way, in quiet collapse. She stopped choosing him, and it felt like death. But it wasn't death. It was withdrawal. From the drug of borrowed meaning, borrowed purpose, borrowed self. He called her cruel. But all she really did was stop being his emotional crutch. He didn't want partnership. He wanted replacement for the voice that abandoned him in childhood. The father who never affirmed, the silence that never soothed. He didn't need a girlfriend. He needed a mirror that didn't crack, but every mirror eventually breaks if you never stand on your own. He begged for closure, but what he needed was sovereignty, to stop waiting to be picked and start remembering he was never meant to be rescued. That's the soul wound most men carry, the belief that salvation wears lipstick. She didn't abandon him. She just stopped being the answer to a question he was afraid to ask. Who am I without her? And the silence that followed. That was the first real moment of truth. He thought he lost her, but what he really lost was his favorite illusion, that someone else would do the work of selfhood for him. She didn't break him. She exposed that he was never whole to begin with, just held together by hope. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. He thought her affection would heal him, that her touch would silence the self-hate, that if someone loved him enough, he'd finally believe he was worth it. But love isn't therapy, it's a mirror, and it reflects whatever you bring to it. She loved him for a while, but love cannot carry what you refuse to confront. So every flaw he ignored started to echo louder through her presence. She didn't wound him, she just made it impossible to keep hiding. Jung said, the deeper the love, the clearer the shadow becomes. He thought connection would fill the void, but it only illuminated how deep that void was. The old shame, the ungrieved losses, the boy who still whispers, I'm not enough. They all showed up the moment she got close. He called it heartbreak, but it was really exposure. Not of her cruelty, but of his internal fragmentation. He wanted her to complete him. But no woman can do what a man refuses to begin. He chased more affection, more validation, more proof. But each kiss was followed by panic, because love to a fractured man isn't comfort. It's a trigger, disguised as intimacy. She didn't break him. She lit a torch inside the cave he sealed shut years ago, a place filled with old guilt, old silence, old hunger. He thought love would erase it, but it only made the writing on the wall legible. He ran from the discomfort, blamed her, blamed timing, blamed fate. But deep down he knew the only thing she ever did wrong was love a man not ready to see himself, because the more she offered, the more ashamed he felt for needing it so badly. He wasn't heartbroken, he was confronted. And if he's honest, brutally honest, he'll admit what hurt most wasn't losing her. It was realizing he used love to delay meeting himself. He thought it was destiny, the way she looked at him, the way time bent around her presence. But it wasn't fate, it was familiarity, in a language he'd forgotten how to speak. She didn't bring new life, she just stirred the ghosts he thought were buried. He said she sparked something in him, but that spark didn't come from her. It came from the old longing, the ache beneath the ambition, the emptiness under the performance. She didn't create it, she triggered it, and he called it passion, because pain with meaning always feels holy. Jung said, passion arises when shadow meets soul. He mistook the quake for chemistry, but it was just the past, trembling under pressure. The boy who wasn't chosen, the man who wasn't enough. They both woke up when she walked in. She wasn't magical. She was the alarm clock. And when she left, he didn't miss her. He missed the version of himself that felt awake, but that version was always his. He just needed her chaos to remember it. It wasn't love, it was resurrection. Of every part he'd abandoned for approval, his fire, his sadness, his truth. She disturbed the silence he mistook for peace, and in that rupture, he remembered he was alive. He called her a muse, but he never created anything. He just sat in the high of emotional chaos, thinking that meant transformation. But growth doesn't come from being stirred. It comes from what you do after the disturbance. She didn't awaken potential. She revealed where it had been locked. Behind addiction, behind compromise, behind pretending to be unbothered. He didn't need more women. He needed to stop confusing intensity for direction. He thought she was a portal, but she was just a mirror with heat. She didn't take him anywhere. She just reminded him of how far from himself he'd drifted. And that reminder, that was the real spark. So what now? Will you keep chasing mirrors? Or finally confront the one thing they always reflected, your own absence? She wasn't your healing. She was your interruption, not a soulmate, but a wake-up call. The woman was never the lesson. Your reaction to her was, you wanted answers, but all she ever gave you was reflection, and that reflection was never flattering, never final, but always true. So ask yourself, what if everything you thought she broke was already fractured? What if she didn't ruin you, but revealed you? And what if your next chapter doesn't begin with revenge, but with resurrection? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep walking this path of brutal self-knowledge and emotional freedom, where pain becomes clarity and clarity becomes power. If this one made you bleed a little, wait until you realize she wasn't love at all. She was your shadow in disguise. The next video? It's not a continuation, it's a confrontation.